What's happening, folks? We are back for the final episode in our journey through Carl Sagan's Cosmos, a Personal Voyage series. I wanted to give a big thank you to everyone who's gone on this trip with me, not only a handful of you who've been friends with me and my channel prior to that, like Michaela and Yvonne, but also a handful of you who've joined because of this watch-along. And indeed, I think that's a testament to the enduring appeal and significance of Carl Sagan and his work now 4.5 decades roughly since this aired and multiple decades since he passed away. And yes, the final episode, episode 13, is called Who Speaks for Earth? And the significance and character of that question will become clear, so I won't talk too much about it at the start. But I will just say this is the perfect culmination of the entire series. All the ideas and concepts that have been aggregating as we've gone from episode to episode are expressed and felt in this episode, and it's a perfect send-off for a beautiful, wonderful, and very inspiring show. So once again, big thanks to Carl Sagan, RIP. Now, I started this on Christmas of 2024, and it's now just about 6 months later. My plan at the time was to go through this show over the course of a year, but I just had so much fun, and ultimately people responded to it quickly and enthusiastically, so I decided just to keep going and do it much more quickly than that. And then eventually, when I realized there's 2 seasons of the Neil deGrasse Tyson Cosmos, one that I have seen and one that I have yet to see and I will see with you folks for the first time, I then committed to finishing both of the coming series by this coming Christmas. So I'm going to have to double my efforts, if you will. I'll have to watch twice as fast because I believe both the first and second Neil deGrasse Tyson seasons have 13 episodes just like this one. So yeah, basically we've got roughly 26 weeks left, so I'm going to have to do essentially one a week. Now I might watch 2 in one installment and then maybe, go a couple weeks and then watch 1 in the next installment. So I don't know exactly how it'll break down, but yes, we will finish both Neil deGrasse Tyson Cosmos series by Christmas of 2025. In any case, let's watch the final episode of Carl Sagan's version, and as I said, it's called Who Speaks for Earth?
I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, that I have set before thee life and death, the blessing and the curse. Therefore choose life, that thou mayest live, thou and thy seed.
Nearly 200 years ago, in the Gulf of Alaska, at a place called Lituya Bay, 2 cultures that had never met experienced a first encounter. The Tlingit people lived more or less as their ancestors had for thousands of years. They were nomads, moving often by canoe between numerous campsites, where they caught the plentiful fish and sea otters and traded with neighboring tribes. The creator they worshipped was the raven god, whom they pictured as an enormous black bird with white wings. And one July day in 1786, the raven god appeared. The Tlingit were terrified. They knew that anyone looking directly at the god would be turned to stone. From the other side of the planet had come an expedition led by the French explorer La Pérouse. It was, in fact, the most elaborately planned scientific voyage of the 18th century, sent around the world to to gather knowledge about the geography, natural history, and peoples of distant lands. But to the Tlingit, whose world was confined to the islands and inlets of southern Alaska, this great vessel could have come only from the gods. There was one among them who dared to look more deeply. He was an old warrior and nearly blind. He said that his life was almost over. For the common good, he would approach the raven to learn whether the god really would turn his people to stone. He set out on his own voyage of discovery to confront the end of the world. The old man made himself look hard at the raven and saw that it was not a great bird from the sky, but the work of men like himself. This first encounter turned out to be peaceful. The men of the La Perouse expedition were under strict orders to treat with respect any people they might discover, an exceptional policy for its time and after. La Perouse and the Tlingit exchanged goods, and then the strange ship sailed away, never to return. Not all encounters between nations had been so peaceful. Before 1519, the Aztecs of Mexico had never seen a gun, and they too believed at first that their strange visitors had come from the sky. The Spaniards under Cortés were not constrained by any injunctions against violence. Their true nature and intentions soon became clear. Unlike the La Perouse expedition, the conquistadors sought not knowledge, but gold. They used their superior weapons to loot and murder. In their madness, they obliterated a civilization. In the name of piety, in a mockery of their religion, the Spaniards utterly destroyed society with an art, astronomy, and architecture the equal of anything in Europe. We revile the conquistadors for their cruelty and short-sightedness, for choosing death. We admire La Perouse and the Tlingit for their courage and wisdom, for choosing life. The choice is with us still, but the civilization now in jeopardy is all humanity. As the ancient mythmakers knew, we're children equally of the earth and the sky. In our tenure on this planet, we've accumulated dangerous evolutionary baggage, propensities for aggression and ritual, submission to leaders, hostility to outsiders, all of which puts our survival in some doubt. But we've also acquired compassion for others, love for our children, a desire to learn from history and experience, and a great, soaring, passionate intelligence, the clear tools for our continued survival and prosperity.
So, as I have done throughout this watch-along, I will just mention that monologue Sagan just gave there, I've sampled in a number of mixes. I can't remember by name in the moment, but yes, I'd say a trance mix, a Sybient mix. So yeah, I'll look into the matter, and if I can remember by the time I post this, I'll put it in the description. But definitely one of my favorite monologues in the show. And again, speaking to the choices that we humans make as societies, communities within societies, but also as a species of many societies. And there was that earlier episode where he talked about the skeins of history, how, you know, every day, every year, every decade, every century, there are innumerable branch points where people's decisions can make varying levels of impact, some of which reverberate down through the centuries and powerfully affect the lives of descendants and future generations of humanity. And of course, when you're talking about technology that is capable of destroying large parts of the earth and human civilization, then of course these decisions can have permanent consequences if we don't make the right ones. So thankfully humanity got through the Cold War, and yet again, multiple decades later, it feels like some of the same issues of geopolitical conflict and military warfare are with us every bit as strongly as they were then. And, you know, fair to say, he talks in that opening about the Tlingit, which I believe is spelled like Tlingit, in Alaska, the Pacific Northwest, and the La Perouse expedition. And I think that is a very beautiful example that, you know, even in an era when it was hard to know what to expect, when different expeditions were exploring, you know, from their point of view, uncharted parts of the earth, and when, you know, peoples were come upon by those they didn't know, there was still the possibility for cultural understanding and seeking knowledge and friendly interaction rather than just exploitation, violence, and submission. And, you know, fair to say, like the Aztec Triple Alliance, you know, it was a pretty imperial state in itself, and it conquered many surrounding tribes and communities as part of its attempt to exert dominance throughout Mesoamerica. But of course, that's no excuse for the conquistadors and those expeditions for brutally exploiting and using violence to enforce their will against the Triple Alliance. So yeah, again, humans both individually and collectively make decisions that have massive consequences. And again, when you're talking about technology of intercontinental missiles, which is the same type of technology which is used to send rockets to space, and of course nuclear bombs, these decisions made unfortunately by very few can ultimately lead to danger for our entire human race. So yes, I think it's still as prescient and as significant as 45 years ago when Sagan was saying this.
Which aspects of our nature will prevail is uncertain.
I think Prevail is one of the mixes where I sampled this bit, so thank you, Sagan, for reminding me.
Which aspects of our nature will prevail is uncertain, particularly when our visions and prospects are bound to one small part of the small planet Earth. But up there in the cosmos, an inescapable perspective awaits. National boundaries are not evident when we view the Earth from space. Fanatic ethnic or religious or national identifications are a little difficult to support when we see our planet as a fragile blue crescent fading to become an inconspicuous point of light against the bastion and citadel of the stars.
I do believe Point of Light, certainly Citadel of the Stars are other mixes. Citadel of the Stars for sure. I don't know with certainty about Point of Light, but yes, again, I apologize to pause for this, but I've been doing it the entire series because I know at least a few of the folks who've been following these watch-alongs do follow my DJ mixes here on YouTube. Enough. We shall continue.
See our planet as a fragile blue crescent, fading to become an inconspicuous point of light against the bastion and citadel of the stars. There are not yet obvious signs of extraterrestrial intelligence, and this makes us wonder whether civilizations like ours rush inevitably headlong to self-destruction. I dream about it, and sometimes they're bad dreams. In the vision of a dream, I once imagined myself searching for other civilizations in the cosmos. Among 100 billion galaxies and 1 billion trillion stars, life and intelligence should have arisen on many worlds. Some worlds are barren and desolate. On them, life never began, or may have been extinguished in some cosmic catastrophe. There may be worlds rich in life, but not yet evolved to intelligence and high technology. There may be civilizations that achieve technology and then promptly use it to destroy themselves.
So again, this is a concept which has been building since very early in the show. I would also say the use of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony throughout this series, I think, is not only very enjoyable to me as someone who loves Beethoven and this symphony in particular, but the different movements have different feelings. And I think the second movement, the Adagio, quite famously has a very intense, tragic, and melancholic feel. And I think using it as the backdrop, the sonic backdrop of this dream sequence or speculation is very effective.
And perhaps there are also beings who learn to live with their technology in themselves, beings who endure and become citizens of the cosmos. Immersed in these thoughts, I found myself approaching a world that was clearly inhabited, a world I had visited before. I saw a planet encompassed by light and recognized the signature of intelligence. But suddenly, darkness, total and absolute. In my dream, I could read the Book of Worlds, a vast encyclopedia of 1 billion planets within the Milky Way. What could the galactic computer tell me about this now darkened world? They must have survived some earlier catastrophe. Locally initiated contact, maybe their television broadcasts. Their biology was different from ours. High technology. I wondered what those lights had been for. There must have been signs they were in trouble. Probability of survival in a century, less than 1%, not very good odds. Communications interrupted. Their world society had failed. They had made the ultimate mistake. I felt a longing to return to Earth. The television transmissions of Earth rushed past me, expanding away from our planet at the speed of light.
Fatto esplodere la prima bomba atomico in un esperimento.
Спутник является первым сателлитом вокруг земного шара.
The nuclear test ban treaty was signed.
Just a moment, please. Something has happened in the motorcade route. Stand by, please.
$64,000.
This bombing of Hanoi was designed to cripple the morale of the
Americano en el homicidio del presidente Salvador Allende.
There can be no whitewash at the White House.
A series of record oil company profits were revealed today.
If the serious course of events continued, foreign ministers are at this moment... Oh, please stand by. Stand by.
Then, suddenly, silence. Total and absolute. But the dream was not yet done. Had we destroyed our home? What had we done to the Earth? There had been many ways for life to perish at our hands. We had poisoned the air and water. We had ravaged the land. Perhaps we had changed the climate. Could it have been a plague or nuclear war? I remembered the galactic computer. What would it say about the Earth? There was our region of the galaxy. There was our world. I had found the entry for Earth. Humanity, third from the sun. They had heard our television broadcasts and thought them an application for cosmic citizenship. Our technology had been growing enormously. They got that right. 200 nation states, about 6 global powers, the potential to become one planet. Probability of survival over a century. Here also, less than 1%. So it was nuclear war, a full nuclear exchange. There would be no more big questions, no more answers. Never again a love or a child. No descendants to remember us and be proud. No more voyages to the stars. No more songs from the earth. I saw East Africa and thought a few million years ago, we humans took our first steps there. Our brains grew and changed. The old parts began to be guided by the new parts. And this made us human, with compassion and foresight and reason. But instead, we listened to that reptilian voice within us, counseling fear, territoriality, aggression. We accepted the products of science. We rejected its methods. Maybe the reptiles will evolve.
Again, it feels like this is as important and relevant in 2025 as it was in 1980. I will say also, the description of our species is not only complicated but difficult, in that humans, if they are anything, they are diverse, they are plastic, they can accommodate many different situations, and individual humans have widely varying psycho-emotional dispositions. But the idea that even the intellectual among us, even those who seek to understand and engage in urbane interaction with those of other lands, other cultures, other societies, are still prone to at least the possibility of overly emotional responses, territoriality, aggression, and so on. So, this is not something that I think will be easily solved, certainly not overnight, and it will take a great deal of effort of nation states, communities, and individual humans if we are to survive technological adolescence. And of course, the difficulty there is also that it takes a great many people working with goodwill and endeavor to facilitate peaceful interactions and intellectual development, and it only takes one or a handful of people with bad intentions and malintent to cause great destruction and undo all of those great endeavors. So yes, these are questions and difficulties humanity will continue to face, but as I said, it is at least inspiring that the Cold War, which at its worst certainly suggested that humans could very well blow themselves up today, tomorrow, next week, that they did find their way through that. So perhaps, despite how dark things look sometimes these days, including in relation to nuclear warfare, humanity will persist. So yes, I love this whole sequence. I had forgotten the framing of Sagan's dream, and the way that first he talks about our spaceship of the imagination investigating another planet which did share a fate which ours might very well still succumb to, and the use of the Encyclopedia Galactica and biological understanding, evolutionary and technological advancement, which have been subjects in prior episodes, now are coming to their full fruition in terms of understanding the stakes that we all face and the possibilities of life and death, as described poetically at the beginning of the episode.
Evolve intelligence once more. We accepted the products of science. We rejected its methods. Maybe the reptiles will evolve intelligence once more. Perhaps one day there will be civilizations again on Earth. There will be life. There will be intelligence. But there will be no more humans. Not here, not on a billion worlds. Every thinking person fears nuclear war, and every technological nation plans for it. Everyone knows it's madness, and every country has an excuse. There's a dreary chain of causality. The Germans were working on the bomb at the beginning of World War II, so the Americans had to make one first. If the Americans had one, the Russians had to have one. And then the British, the French, the Chinese, the Indians, the Pakistanis, many nations now collect nuclear weapons. They're easy to make. You can steal fissionable material from nuclear reactors. Nuclear weapons have almost become a home handicraft industry. The conventional bombs of World War II were called blockbusters. Filled with 20 tons of TNT, they could destroy a city block. All the bombs dropped on all the cities of World War II amounted to some 2 million tons of TNT, 2 megatons. Coventry and Rotterdam, Dresden and Tokyo, all the death that rained from the skies between 1939 and 1945. 100,000 blockbusters, 2 megatons. Today, 2 megatons is the equivalent of a single thermonuclear bomb, one bomb with the destructive force of the Second World War. But there are tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. The missile and bomber forces of the Soviet Union and the United States have warheads aimed at over 15,000 designated targets. No place on the planet is safe. The energy contained in these weapons, genies of death patiently awaiting the rubbing of the lamps, totals far more than 10,000 megatons, but with the destruction concentrated efficiently, not over 6 years, but over a few hours. A blockbuster for every family on the planet. A World War II every second for the length of a lazy afternoon. The bomb dropped on Hiroshima killed 70,000 people in a full nuclear exchange, in the paroxysm of global death. The equivalent of 1 million Hiroshima bombs would be dropped all over the world. But in such an exchange, not everyone would be killed by the blast and the firestorm and the immediate radiation. There would be other agonies, the loss of loved ones, the legions of the burned and blinded and mutilated, the absence of medical care, disease, plague, long-lived radiation poisoning the soil and the water, the threat of tumors and stillbirths and malformed children, and the hopeless sense of a civilization destroyed for nothing, the knowledge that we could have prevented it and did not. The global balance of terror, pioneered by the United States and the Soviet Union, holds hostage all the citizens of the earth. Each side persistently probes the limits of the other's tolerance, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, the testing of anti-satellite weapons, the Vietnam and Afghanistan wars. The hostile military establishments are locked in some ghastly mutual embrace. Each needs the other. But the balance of terror is a delicate balance with very little margin for miscalculation. And the world...
Which, of course, just to give a little musical side note, as someone who reacts to a lot of music on my YouTube, the Nena song, 99 Luftballons, I think the genius of that song is that the delicate balance of nuclear holocaust during the Cold War and right on up into the present, it rests on individual decisions made in snap seconds by all manner of technical, political, and scientific staff or organizations and divisions. And the idea that something as simple, innocent, and simply beautiful as a little red balloon somehow registering on a radar screen or some technological sensor, leading someone to panic and quickly hit a button, leading to other people in another office immediately hitting other buttons and launching weapons, thinking they are responding to an attack by some geopolitical adversary, and thus ushering in a global catastrophe of mutually assured destruction, is entirely within the realm of reason. And what a tragic, ironic, and brutally, I was going to say funny, but darkly humorous outcome. The idea that something as simple as a child's toy could lead a civilization on edge and constantly threatening itself with destruction to completely implode and essentially end the human species. What a terrible irony and awful outcome that would be. So again, it's one song among a number in all sorts of different genres that address the idea of mutually assured destruction, nuclear holocaust. See also Iron Maiden's 2 Minutes to Midnight, and Naked Aggression's, what's the name of the song? I reacted to it. But yes, again, there are more famous examples, but I think that song is especially prescient, poignant, and well crafted. So yeah, when I think of something in this vein of someone monitoring a screen somewhere, seeing something, overreacting, and through a series of chain reaction overreactions, our entire global civilization and even species itself coming to an end, it seems all too possible, all too real.
But the balance of terror is a delicate balance with very little margin for miscalculation. And the world impoverishes itself by spending $1 trillion a year on preparations for war, and by employing perhaps half the scientists and high technologists on the planet in military endeavors. How would we explain all this to a dispassionate extraterrestrial observer? What account would we give of our stewardship of the planet Earth? We have heard the rationales offered by the superpowers. We know who speaks for the nations, but who speaks for the human species? Who speaks for Earth? From an extraterrestrial perspective, our global civilization is clearly on the edge of failure in the most important task it faces, preserving the lives and well-being of its citizens and the future habitability of the planet. But if we're willing to live with the growing likelihood of nuclear war, shouldn't we also be willing to explore vigorously every possible means to prevent nuclear war? Shouldn't we consider in every nation major changes in the traditional ways of doing things, a fundamental restructuring of economic, political, social, and religious institutions? We've reached a point where there can be no more special interests or special cases. Nuclear arms threaten every person on the Earth. Fundamental changes in society are sometimes labeled impractical or contrary to human nature, as if nuclear war were practical, or as if there were only one human nature. But fundamental changes can clearly be made. We're surrounded by them. In the last 2 centuries, abject slavery, which was with us for thousands of years, has almost entirely been eliminated in a stirring worldwide revolution.
Indeed, and I would say there was the earliest part of this monologue, like a minute and a half ago, I've sampled, and I think it's in my mix, We Are One Planet, or maybe it's just called One Planet. But yes, like that idea, as a historian, I obviously have a bit of insight about it, and certainly depending on where you are in the world, the acceptance of abject slavery became problematic or fell out of fashion at different times. And there are some places where it existed right up into the mid-20th century. But he's right in that over a relatively short time, even by human historical standards, never mind biological standards, which spans billions of years, slavery did become, at least officially and in the most abject sense, obsolete very, very quickly. But it is also, I think, telling that for millennia, pretty much all over the planet, it was taken as common, natural, taken for granted as just, what we humans did. So the idea, as he's saying, that a huge, dramatic, and drastic change can take place in the way that we think and do things collectively on a societal or indeed global level, the idea that changes of that nature can happen and not even take that long is entirely realistic and justified by a cursory example or study of human history.
Last 2 centuries, abject slavery, which was with us for thousands of years, has almost entirely been eliminated in a stirring worldwide revolution. Women, systematically mistreated for millennia, are gradually gaining the political and economic power traditionally denied to them. And some wars of aggression have recently been stopped or curtailed because of a revulsion felt by the people in the aggressor nations.
The old appeals to racial, sexual, and religious chauvinism and to rabid nationalist fervor are beginning not to work. A new consciousness is developing which sees the Earth as a single organism and recognizes that an organism at war with itself is doomed. We are one planet.
One of the great revelations of the age of space exploration is the image of the Earth, finite and lonely, somehow vulnerable, bearing the entire human species through the oceans of space and time. But this is an ancient perception. In the 3rd century BC, our planet was mapped and accurately measured by a Greek scientist named Eratosthenes, who worked in Egypt. This was the world as he knew it. Eratosthenes was the director of the great Library of Alexandria, the center of science and learning in the ancient world. Aristotle had argued that humanity was divided into Greeks and everybody else, who he called barbarians, and that the Greeks should keep themselves racially pure. He thought it was fitting for the Greeks to enslave other peoples. But Eratosthenes criticized Aristotle for his blind chauvinism. He believed there was good and bad in every nation. The Greek conquerors had invented a new god for the Egyptians, but he looked remarkably Greek. Alexander was portrayed as Pharaoh, in a gesture to the Egyptians, but in practice, the Greeks were confident of their superiority. The casual protests of the librarian hardly constituted a serious challenge to prevailing prejudices. Their world was as imperfect as our own, but the Ptolemies, the Greek kings of Egypt who followed Alexander, had at least this virtue. They supported the advancement of knowledge. Popular ideas about the nature of the cosmos were challenged, and some of them discarded. New ideas were proposed and found to be in better accord with the facts. There were imaginative proposals, vigorous debates, brilliant syntheses, and the resulting treasure of human knowledge was recorded and preserved for centuries on these shelves. Science came of age in this library.
The Ptolemies didn't merely collect old knowledge. They supported scientific research and generated new knowledge. The results were amazing. Eratosthenes accurately calculated the size of the Earth. He mapped it, and he argued that it could be circumnavigated. Hipparchus anticipated that stars come into being, slowly move during the course of centuries, and eventually perish. It was he who first cataloged the positions and magnitudes of the stars in order to determine whether there were such changes. Euclid produced a textbook on geometry which human beings learned from for 23 centuries. It's still a great read, full of the most elegant proofs. Galen wrote basic works on healing and anatomy, which dominated medicine until the Renaissance.
And I talked about Galen, I believe, in the previous episode where I discussed my own translation work when Sagan was talking about Champollion and decoding the Egyptian hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt. And yes, it's interesting how some of these names, again, like more than a millennium later, were still some of the most cited and read experts in a variety of fields. So yes, the repository of knowledge in the Library of Alexandria was a testament to human ingenuity, and the fact that most of the scrolls and manuscripts from it are forever lost is one of the great cultural tragedies of recorded history.
Great read, full of the most elegant proofs. Galen wrote basic works on healing and anatomy, which dominated medicine until the Renaissance. These are just a few examples. There were dozens of great scholars here and hundreds of fundamental discoveries.
Some of those discoveries have a distinctly modern ring. Apollonius of Perga studied the parabola and the ellipse. Curves that we know today describe the paths of falling objects in a gravitational field and space vehicles traveling between the planets.
And of course, we're thinking of the episode in which the orbits of the planets around the sun was discussed, and how, you know, they were considered to be part of these perfect circular spheres, and it was only when the formula for an ellipse was investigated that a greater understanding ultimately arrived. So again, the idea of challenging long-held preconceptions, often stemming from religious or cultural dogma, that the attempts to see beyond those and just try to understand the actual data in accordance with facts, that is not only requires a degree of intellectual and personal bravery, but can lead to some of the greatest breakthroughs in our collective understanding.
Huron of Alexandria invented steam engines and gear trains. He was the author of the first book on robots.
Apologies, let me back that up for a second.
Traveling between the planets. Huron of Alexandria invented steam engines and gear trains. He was the author of the first book on robots. Imagine how different our world would be if those discoveries had been explained and used for the benefit of everyone, if the humane perspective of Eratosthenes had been widely adopted and applied. But this was not to be.
Alexandria was the greatest city the Western world had ever seen. People from all nations came here to live, to trade, to learn. On a given day, these harbors were thronged with merchants, scholars, tourists. It's probably here that the word cosmopolitan realized its true meaning of a citizen, not just of a nation, but of the cosmos. To be a citizen of the cosmos. Here were clearly the seeds of our modern world. But why didn't they take root and flourish? Why instead did the West slumber through 1,000 years of darkness until Columbus and Copernicus and their contemporaries rediscovered the work done here? I cannot give you a simple answer, but I do know this. There is no record in the entire history of the library that any of the illustrious scholars and scientists who worked here ever seriously challenged a single political or economic or religious assumption of the society in which they lived. The permanence of the stars was questioned. The justice of slavery was not. Science and learning in general were the preserve of the privileged few. The vast population of the city had not the vaguest notion of the great discoveries being made within these walls. How could they? The new findings were not explained or popularized. The progress made here benefited them little. Science was not part of their lives. The discoveries in mechanics, say, or steam technology, mainly were applied to the perfection of weapons, to the encouragement of superstition, to the amusement of kings. Scientists never seemed to grasp the enormous potential of machines to free people from arduous and repetitive labor.
And of course, you know, not to get ahead of what he's saying here, but the idea of needing to make scientific methods, discoveries, and understandings more accessible, more applicable, and more fairly distributed is, of course, part of what this show and Sagan's entire life work was all about: popularizing science, making it understandable to lay people, trying to apply it in ways that benefited the vast majority of humanity, not a select few, not letting it just be the province of national governments and wealthy and powerful people who would use it to exploit and extract and benefit their own ends. So yes, exactly what he's describing here is what his work was trying to provide an antidote to.
Scientists never seem to grasp the enormous potential of machines to free people from arduous and repetitive labor. The great intellectual achievements of antiquity had few practical applications. Science never captured the imagination of the multitude. There was no counterbalance to stagnation, to pessimism, to the most abject surrender to mysticism. So when, at long last, the mob came to burn the place down, there was nobody to stop them. Let me tell you about the end. It's a story about the last scientist to work in this place, a mathematician, astronomer, physicist, and head of the school of Neoplatonic philosophy in Alexandria. That's an extraordinary range of accomplishments for any individual in any age. Her name was Hypatia. She was born in this city in the year 370 AD. This was a time when women had essentially no options. They were considered property. Nevertheless, Hypatia was able to move freely, unself-consciously, through traditional male domains. By all accounts, she was a great beauty. And although she had many suitors, she had no interest in marriage. The Alexandria of Hypatia's time, by then long under Roman rule, was a city in grave conflict. Slavery, the cancer of the ancient world, had sapped classical civilization of its vitality. The growing Christian church was consolidating its power and attempting to eradicate pagan influence and culture. Hypatia stood at the focus, at the epicenter of mighty social forces. Cyril, the bishop of Alexandria, despised her, in part because of her close friendship with the Roman governor, but also because she was a symbol of learning and science, which were largely identified by the early church with paganism. In great personal danger, Hypatia continued to teach and to publish until, in the year 415 AD, on her way to work, she was set upon by a fanatical mob of Cyril's followers. They dragged her from a chariot, tore off her clothes, and flayed her flesh from her bones with abalone shells. Her remains were burned, her works obliterated, her name forgotten. Cyril was made a saint. The glory you see around me is nothing but a memory. It does not exist. The last remains of the library were destroyed within a year of Hypatia's death. It's as if an entire civilization had undergone a sort of self-inflicted radical brain surgery, so that most of its memories, discoveries, ideas, and passions were irrevocably wiped out. The loss was incalculable.
Little side note, I forget if it's her given name or her middle name, but Sagan named one of her daughters after Hypatia, which I think is not only a beautiful tribute, but it's a lovely name as well, and it speaks to the reverence with which you can hear and see him speak about the Hypatia from antiquity, and fair to say, those who follow my DJ mixes, specifically my ambient excursion mixes, will know that one of the locations in the mythology I built up around the ambient excursion is an Arctic research station called Hypatia for similar reasons.
Were irrevocably wiped out. The loss was incalculable. In some cases, we know only the tantalizing titles of books that had been destroyed. In most cases, we know neither the titles nor the authors. We do know that in this library, there were 123 different plays by Sophocles, of which only 7 have survived to our time. One of those 7 is Oedipus Rex. Similar numbers apply to the lost works of Aeschylus, Euripides, Aristophanes. It's little as if the only surviving works of a man named William Shakespeare were Coriolanus and A Winter's Tale, although we had heard that he had written some other things which were highly prized in his time. Plays called Hamlet, Macbeth, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Julius Caesar, King Lear, Romeo and Juliet.
As someone who is a very enthusiastic Shakespeare reader and fan, that example, that hypothetical really hits home to me because, again, while Coriolanus and A Winter's Tale are good in their own right, the idea of us only knowing those and being deprived of plays like Hamlet or Macbeth or Romeo and Juliet, A Midsummer Night's Dream, it's unthinkable for those who enjoy Billy Shakes and his vast catalog of incredible plays. So, yes, the idea that there are other scholars for whom we do have this pitiful few examples of a much larger body of work, with the majority of it forever lost, known either only by name or not at all, is, again, a devastating tragedy of human history. And so the idea of not repeating that in the modern technological age and wiping out millennia and centuries of aggregated knowledge and art and cultural distinction through a moment of madness, through a red balloon flying onto a radar screen and causing all sorts of panic, is tantamount and, or rather is paramount, and is something which all thinking beings and those who would like to visit the stars rather than self-destruct should take to heart. And kudos to Sagan for this show being his contribution to that endeavor.
History is full of people who, out of fear or ignorance or the lust for power, have destroyed treasures of immeasurable value, which truly belong to all of us. We must not let it happen again. We have considered the destruction of worlds and the end of civilizations. But there is another perspective by which to measure human endeavors. Let me tell you a story about the beginning. Some 15 billion years ago, our universe began with the mightiest explosion of all time. The universe expanded, cooled, and darkened. Energy condensed into matter, mostly hydrogen atoms. These atoms accumulated into vast clouds, rushing away from each other, that would one day become the galaxies. Within these galaxies, the first generation of stars was born, kindling the energy hidden in matter, flooding the cosmos with light. Hydrogen atoms had made suns and starlight. There were in those times no planets to receive the light, and no living creatures to admire the radiance of the heavens. But deep in the stellar furnaces, nuclear fusion was creating the heavier atoms, carbon and oxygen, silicon and iron. These elements, the ash left by hydrogen, were the raw materials from which planets and life would later arise. At first, the heavy elements were trapped in the hearts of the stars, but massive stars soon exhausted their fuel and in their death throes returned most of their substance back into space. The interstellar gas became enriched in heavy elements. In the Milky Way galaxy, the matter of the cosmos was recycled into new generations of stars, now rich in heavy atoms, a legacy from their stellar ancestors. And in the cold of interstellar space, great turbulent clouds were gathered by gravity and stirred by starlight. In their depths, the heavy atoms condensed into grains of rocky dust and ice and complex carbon-based molecules. In accordance with the laws of physics and chemistry, hydrogen atoms had brought forth the stuff of life. In other clouds, more massive aggregates of gas and dust formed later generations of stars. As new stars were formed, tiny condensations of matter accreted near them, inconspicuous motes of rock and metal, ice and gas that would become the planets. And on these worlds, as in interstellar clouds, organic molecules formed, made of atoms that had been cooked inside the stars. In the tide pools and oceans of many worlds, molecules were destroyed by sunlight and assembled by chemistry. One day, among these natural experiments, a molecule arose that quite by accident was able to make crude copies of itself. As time passed, self-replication became more accurate. Those molecules that copied better produced more copies. Natural selection was underway. Elaborate molecular machines had evolved. Slowly, imperceptibly, life had begun. Collectives of organic molecules evolved into one-celled organisms. These produced multi-celled colonies. Their various parts became specialized organs. Some colonies attached themselves to the sea floor. Others swam freely. Eyes evolved, and now the cosmos could see. Living things moved on to colonize the land. The reptiles held sway for a time, but they gave way to small, warm-blooded creatures with bigger brains who developed dexterity and curiosity about their environment. They learned to use tools and fire and language. Star stuff, the ash of stellar alchemy, had emerged into consciousness. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself. We are creatures of the cosmos and have always hungered to know our origins, to understand our connection with the universe. How did everything come to be? Every culture on the planet has devised its own response to the riddle posed by the universe. Every culture celebrates the cycles of life and nature. There are many different ways of being human. But an extraterrestrial visitor, examining the differences among human societies, would find those differences trivial compared to the similarities. We are one species. We are star stuff, harvesting starlight. Our lives, our past and our future are tied to the sun, the moon, and the stars. Our ancestors knew that their survival depended on understanding the heavens. They built observatories and computers to predict the changing of the seasons by the motions in the skies. We are, all of us, descended from astronomers. The discovery that there is order in the universe, that there are laws of nature, is the foundation on which science builds today. Our conception of the cosmos, all of modern science and technology, trace back to questions raised by the stars. Yet, even 400 years ago, we still had no idea of our place in the universe. The long journey to that understanding required both an unflinching respect for the facts and a delight in the natural world.
I mean, just think of how he's summarizing and calling back to everything we've seen about the methods of science being more significant than any individual conclusion, the way that physical reality, physics and chemistry, adhere to regularities and predictable outcomes, and thus what he calls laws of nature, and how that allows us to do science, how ancient astronomers meticulously cataloged what they observed and tried to incorporate that understanding into culture and society, the way that people like Johannes Kepler and Tycho Brahe and in later centuries, Milton Humason and all the people that we've heard about are part of this endeavor in which personal pre-established convictions were set aside and an unwavering acknowledgement of the facts, even if that was not common, even if political and religious and cultural authorities preferred dogma and were hostile to those who engaged in free thinking and scientific endeavor. It's, the reason we're sitting here watching DVDs using electronic or electrical power, the reason that we can communicate with technological devices and meet people in countries far-flung from our own, thousands of miles away, which, as someone who runs a YouTube and a Patreon and has met people from literally all over the planet and who considers some of these people to be very near and dear to me and who enrich my life and who make my experience of things like the Cosmos series far beyond what it would be just independently, it's a testament to not only the significance of science, but the human possibility and propensity for learning, for sharing and understanding, and of course a tribute to and celebration of someone like Carl Sagan, who synthesized all that in his work and is why we're sitting here watching this now.
Johannes Kepler wrote, "We do not ask for what useful purpose the birds do sing, for song is their pleasure, since they were created for singing. Similarly, we ought not to ask why the human mind troubles to fathom the secrets of the heavens. The diversity of the phenomena of nature is so great, and the treasures hidden in the heavens so rich, precisely in order that the human mind shall never be lacking in fresh nourishment." It is the birthright of every child to encounter the cosmos anew, in every culture, and every age. When this happens to us, we experience a deep sense of wonder. The most fortunate among us are guided by teachers who channel this exhilaration. We are born to delight in the world. We are taught to distinguish our preconceptions from the truth. Then, new worlds are discovered as we decipher the mysteries of the cosmos. Science is a collective enterprise that embraces many cultures and spans the generations. In every age, and sometimes in the most unlikely places, there are those who wish with a great passion to understand the world. There is no way of knowing where the next discovery will come from. What dream of the mind's eye will remake the world? These dreams begin as impossibilities. Once, even to see a planet through a telescope was an astonishment. But we studied these worlds, we figured out how they moved in their orbits, and soon we were planning voyages of discovery beyond the Earth and sending robot explorers to the planets and the stars. We humans long to be connected with our origins, so we create rituals. Science is another way to express this longing. It also connects us with our origins, and it too has its rituals and its commandments.
So, one of the books Sagan wrote, and indeed one he wrote shortly before he died, Pale Blue Dot, the latter stages of the book really talk about how science is mostly or significantly untapped in terms of its potential to inspire, to cause awe and a degree of reverence for the universe, and the idea that science, in a very legitimate way, could be a type of religious understanding or an experience for us psychologically, emotionally, beyond its technical and intellectual relevance and significance, is something which could be a boon to humanity, a revelation for our global society. And he really does go into some detail beyond what he's about to say here, or is already beginning to say here, about how science, if viewed from a certain angle, could be one of the most profound rituals and belief systems that humans have created, and one which could again speak to awe and inspiration beyond what many cultural dogmas have ever produced at their greatest height.
Its only sacred truth is that there are no sacred truths.
Temperature systems.
All assumptions must be critically examined. Arguments from authority are worthless.
Basic mode is imaging 3. AACS readout mode is telemetry. Transducer power is on.
Whatever is inconsistent with the facts, no matter how fond of it we are, must be discarded or revised. Science is not perfect. It's often misused. It's only a tool. But it's the best tool we have. Self-correcting, ever-changing, applicable to everything. With this tool, we vanquish the impossible.
I apologize. I need to put out some food for Luca before I finish this. But I feel like, number one, that's an incredibly inspiring sentence he just said there. And if I don't have a mix called Vanquish the Impossible, I certainly need to have one soon. But yes, give me one moment, which for you will literally be one moment. Okay. And I have to say, it's been a little bit since I've made an all-meat excursion mix, and I believe in celebration of us doing this watch-along and its completion, my next all-meat excursion will hopefully be in the next week or so, and it will be titled Vanquish the Impossible. Okay.
Tool, we vanquish the impossible. With the methods of science, we have begun to explore the cosmos. For the first time, scientific discoveries are widely accessible. Our machines, the products of our science, are now beyond the orbit of Saturn. A preliminary spacecraft reconnaissance has been made of 20 new worlds. We have learned to value careful observations, to respect the facts even when they are disquieting, when they seem to contradict conventional wisdom. The Canterbury monks faithfully recorded an impact on the moon, and the Anasazi people an explosion of a distant star. They saw for us as we see for them. We see further than they only because we stand on their shoulders. We build on what they knew. We depend on free inquiry and free access to knowledge. We humans have seen the atoms which constitute all of matter and the forces that sculpt this world and others. We have found that the molecules of life are easily formed under conditions common throughout the cosmos. We have mapped the molecular machines at the heart of life. We have discovered a microcosm in a drop of water. We have peered into the bloodstream and down on our stormy planet to see the Earth as a single organism. We have found volcanoes on other worlds and explosions on the sun, studied comets from the depths of space, and traced their origins and destinies. Listened to pulsars and searched for other civilizations. We humans have set foot on another world, in a place called the Sea of Tranquility, an astonishing achievement for creatures such as we, whose earliest footsteps, 3.5 million years old, are preserved in the volcanic ash of East Africa. We have walked far. These are some of the things that hydrogen atoms do, given 15 billion years of cosmic evolution.
It has the sound of epic myth, but it's simply a description of the evolution of the cosmos as revealed by science in our time. And we who embody the local eyes and ears and thoughts and feelings of the cosmos, we've begun at last to wonder about our origins, star stuff, contemplating the stars, organized collections of 10 billion atoms, contemplating the evolution of matter, tracing that long path by which it arrived at consciousness here on the planet Earth and perhaps throughout the cosmos. Our loyalties are to the species and the planet. We speak for Earth. Our obligation to survive and flourish is owed not just to ourselves, but also to that cosmos, ancient and vast, from which we spring.
I mean, what a perfect end. It's obviously very book-ended with the first episode, and now that Sagan has passed on, this shot of him forever exploring the cosmos in a spaceship of the imagination. What a lovely, poetic conclusion to this series and a legacy that he left with this show.
The greatest thrill for me in reliving this adventure has been not just that we've completed the preliminary reconnaissance with spacecraft of the entire solar system, and not just that we've discovered astonishing structures in the realm of the galaxies, but especially that some of Cosmos's boldest dreams about this world are coming closer to reality. Since this series' maiden voyage, the impossible has come to pass. Mighty walls that maintained insuperable ideological differences have come tumbling down. Deadly enemies have embraced and begun to work together. The imperative to cherish the Earth and to protect the global environment that sustains all of us has become widely accepted. And we've begun, finally, the process of reducing the obscene number of weapons of mass destruction. Perhaps we have, after all, decided to choose life.
And it's interesting, while much of that remains true, and certainly there has been progress geopolitically, culturally, technologically in those regards since the airing of Cosmos, I suppose it is also fair to say with a bit of a heavy heart that there has been some backsliding. There continues to be geopolitical and military and technological dangers, and the forces and pressures of division, territoriality, hyper-nationality, or rather hyper-nationalism, and the careless disregard for those fine margins of the balance of terror has persisted. So the diligence required and the endurance and vigilance required is every bit as important as it was in this mid-90s update that he was giving here. So yes, the war is not over, even if several intellectual and global battles had been won by the time he recorded this. So for Sagan and for others of a similar mindset, and for the species as a whole, and for our planet as a whole, we must forge ahead with the lessons and wisdom of a series like this in our minds.
But we still have light years to go to ensure that choice. Even after the summits and the ceremonies and the treaties, there are still some 50,000 nuclear weapons in the world. And it would require the detonation of only a tiny fraction of them to produce a nuclear winter, the predicted global climatic catastrophe that would result from the smoke and the dust lifted into the atmosphere by burning cities and petroleum facilities. The world scientific community has begun to sound the alarm about the grave dangers posed by depleting the protective ozone shield and by greenhouse warming. And again, we're taking some mitigating steps. But again, those steps are too small and too slow. The discovery that such a thing as nuclear winter was really possible evolved out of studies of Martian dust storms. The surface of Mars, fried by ultraviolet light, is also a reminder of why it's important to keep our ozone layer intact. The runaway greenhouse effect on Venus is a valuable reminder that we must take the increasing greenhouse effect on Earth seriously. Important lessons about our environment have come from spacecraft missions to the planets. By exploring other worlds, we safeguard this one. By itself, I think this fact more than justifies the money our species has spent in sending ships to other worlds. It is our fate to live during one of the most perilous, and at the same time one of the most hopeful chapters in human history. Our science and our technology have posed us a profound question. Will we learn to use these tools with wisdom and foresight before it's too late? Will we see our species safely through this difficult passage so that our children and grandchildren will continue the great journey of discovery still deeper into the mysteries of the cosmos? That same rocket and nuclear and computer technology that sends our ships past the farthest known planet can also be used to destroy our global civilization. Exactly the same technology can be used for good and for evil. It is as if there were a God who said to us, I set before you two ways. You can use your technology to destroy yourselves or to carry you to the planets and the stars. It's up to you.
you have it, folks. I want to once again thank everyone who took this journey with me, and I know I talk a lot during the episodes, including in some cases, little silly things like mentioning my mixed titles, but I really do hope that at least a handful of things I said along the way either enhanced or otherwise provided some texture and context to the experience of watching it. I've enjoyed watching it with you folks and have loved the comments that people have written, and of course these videos will now be up indefinitely. I can't say how long, but I'd love to think that these videos will still be on YouTube or some other platform even after I go the way of Mr. Sagan. And indeed, my use of his words in my DJ mixes, in references that I've made in other social media, and in these watch-alongs, it is my own tiny, minuscule contribution to the perpetuation and distribution of the perspectives, the insight and understanding that I've derived from Sagan's work. And so the idea that even if just in a minute way I would perpetuate his thinking and his work, and that there might even be a handful of folks who had never been aware of it or had never experienced it and came to know it through, again, my DJ mixes or these watch-alongs, brings me great satisfaction. As many of you probably noticed, I have a deep emotional connection to this series and to the books that Sagan has written, above and beyond the intellectual understanding and the scientific and cosmic knowledge I have derived from it. So yes, the place that this series holds in my heart, so to speak, poetically, is enormous and is probably quite obvious. So yes, I hope some of you have come to a similar perspective. I know there's a few of you who have talked to me that it has been a great joy to watch the episodes thus far, and hopefully you enjoyed this final episode just as much. As I said, I'm going to go through both of the Neil deGrasse Tyson cosmoses in the next 6 months, and I'm very much looking forward to the first episode of the first Neil deGrasse Tyson season, because he talks about in the opening episode how he met Sagan pretty early on in his career of higher education and took great personal inspiration from that. And in this episode, we heard Sagan talk about how a lucky few of us are graced by dedicated teachers and those who want us to succeed and carry the torch of scientific endeavor, and the degree to which that was true for Neil deGrasse Tyson as it relates to Carl Sagan will be evident in that first episode and beyond. So yes, I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you once again for taking this journey. Shout out to all the folks who produced this show, who were involved in creating its visual and technical aspects, those who did research for it, even the actors who played the parts in the montage or historical sequences, the kids that Sagan spoke to and at that elementary school in one of the episodes, basically all those who take value in even a small part of this or contributed to a small part of this. I commend them and applaud them. So yes, thank you again for watching. Let me know what you think of this final episode, and I will see you next time. Peace.